The programs will not be seen tonight so that ABC News can bring you color coverage of the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
This fourth session of the 35th Democratic Convention is about to nominate Hubert Humphrey as its candidate for president. We will be down there live when the clerk begins the roll call with the famous words, Alabama, 32 votes. It's expected that long before we hear the words Virgin Islands, 5 votes, Hubert Humphrey will have acquired the 1,312 votes necessary for nomination. That knowledge cheered the Vice President today as he looked ahead to the night he has dreamed of for years. This afternoon, the defeat of the plank calling for an immediate halt to the bombing in North Vietnam set off a demonstration. This latest and deepest of the party's divisions may be the toughest for Humphrey to bridge. In Chicago's Grant Park today, miles from the International Amphitheater geographically and light years from the convention philosophically, there were other demonstrations and tear gas. On the principle that politics is too serious to be left to politicians, show business people have become, as they say, involved. That's the subject of tonight's close-up. In addition, our successful extra added attractions, William Buckley and Gore Vidal.
One of the more vivid pleasures of Chicago has been the spectacle of a Soviet-style police state in action. The police here are brutal, the citizens are paralyzed, and the right of peaceful assembly has been denied by Mayor Daley, who believes in order without law.
The selection of Mr. Humphrey is what, in a Republican context, would be hilariously applauded as the choice of a moderate over against an extremist. But the American left are very poor losers, and therefore it means trouble for the Democratic Party.
Buckley and Vidal, Sonny and Cher, political editor Bill Lawrence on the spot, and the balloting live and in color of the Democratic candidate for president, all on Race to the White House, Chicago, Day 3.
From Chicago, ABC News presents Race to the White House. ABC News special coverage of the 1968 Democratic National Convention. Brought to you by B.F. Goodrich, the name that assures quality in tires, chemicals, products for home, industry, and aviation. B.F. Goodrich, where exciting things are happening. And by Time, the weekly news magazine that keeps 20 million readers around the world fully informed. The more you need to know, the more you need Time.
He's the hero of Tippecanoe. Old Abe Lincoln came out of the wilderness. Get on the raft with Captain Boy. Bring our hats off to you, Mr. Wilson.
This is politics as it used to be, the great American hoopla. But times change. Today, though much of the surface excitement remains, there is an underlying sobriety, a deeper realization that the electing of a president is serious business. From first caucus to last hurrah, Time separates the truth from the tinsel, brings the gathering drama into focus week by week. Whether it's about an odds-on favorite or a favorite son, Time gives 20 million readers the facts worth knowing, the stories worth telling. The more you need to know, the more you need Time.
Good evening from Chicago. In the event that you haven't thought of it, President Johnson's leadership of the Democratic Party is now in its last hours. In a while, down there, the delegates will nominate their candidate for president, who becomes automatically the de facto new chief of the party. That, the most important business of any convention, may, emotionally at least, be an anticlimax. For earlier today, the convention at last fought out the issue that has so long divided it, Vietnam. The result, the pro-administration plank endorsed by Vice President Humphrey was accepted, and the so-called peace plank was defeated. The score, about 1,500 votes to 1,000 votes. There may be delayed reactions in days to come, but tonight the important fact seems to be that the party stayed reasonably united. The long floor debate before the vote was vigorous, but so far as we can tell, not yet bruising. However, beyond the hall, police and anti-war demonstrators battled inside Chicago's hotels today, and Vice President Hubert Humphrey was among those who got a whiff of police tear gas. Now, in the last hours before the presidential nomination, ABC political editor Bill Lawrence has made his final count of where the delegates stand.
The Humphrey bandwagon picked up more speed today, and there may yet be a wild stampede to the vice president before the first ballot is completed. With 1,312 votes required for nomination, our latest ABC delegate count now shows Humphrey, 1,684.5 votes, more than 370 votes above the magic margin, which Humphrey should reach by the time the roll call reaches Rhode Island. Senator McCarthy, 687.5 votes. Senator McGovern, 132 votes. Favorite sons and others, 117.5 votes. The Democrats, like the Republicans before them, got no help or clear guidance from the public opinion polls in picking their presidential nominee. There was a Lou Harris poll published today which showed that Republican presidential nominee Nixon would run 6 percentage points ahead of all three men, Humphrey, McCarthy, or retiring President Johnson. Now, a Gallup poll published just about a week ago showed that Nixon led Humphrey by 16 percentage points, and that Nixon led McCarthy by only 5 points. So the polls are just simply confusing enough to be ridiculous. One thing that the delegates did do in giving Humphrey a majority was to disregard the evidence, the verdicts of the nation's primary states. In all of them, from New Hampshire onwards, the anti-administration forces of McCarthy and the late Senator Robert Kennedy simply swamped the administration forces. Howard?
Bill, that ever-growing delegate total has caused Humphrey to behave today like a man who feels he can defy the polls and go on to defeat Richard Nixon in November. The confidence, almost cockiness, of the vice president was obvious as he greeted delegates and admirers alike today en route to a meeting with the Connecticut delegation. Humphrey looked and talked like a winner, saying that he hasn't lost an election yet and doesn't intend to in the fall.
For any of you that have any doubt as to what we can do in this campaign, I remind you that I won a lot of elections. And I don't intend to start losing at this age in my life against Richard Nixon. I don't intend to.
The last chapter of the draft Kennedy move ended today when the Massachusetts Senator's Washington office issued another and apparently a final flat no. The statement said that Kennedy's decision was final, firm, and not subject to further consideration. It cited Kennedy's earlier personal and family reasons. The beginning of the end of the draft effort came in the early hours this morning. According to reliable sources, Stephen Smith, the brother-in-law of Kennedy, met with California's Jess Unruh and an unidentified McCarthy representative. McCarthy's man let it be known that McCarthy, fighting a hopeless cause against Humphrey, was ready to throw his support behind Kennedy. So they rang up Hyannis and informed Kennedy of that new development. The sources say that Ted Kennedy reluctantly gave his draft the green light. He reportedly told the group to have Chicago's kingmaker, Richard J. Daley, put the pieces together. But when the group got to Daley, he said he would not have any part in it. So back to the telephone and another call to Hyannis. This time, Ted Kennedy said he didn't want the draft anyhow, so forget it. Sources close to the senator say he was afraid the draft was just a scheme to force him into accepting the nomination for vice president. They add that if the convention would have genuinely come to Kennedy, he would have accepted the top spot on the ticket. But those sources add that at this point, Teddy Kennedy feels he is not emotionally ready to get back into the ball game. At this morning's Illinois caucus, youthful Kennedy supporters were undaunted, but Kingmaker Dick Daley made it final that this was not to be Ted Kennedy's year.
Gentlemen, I'm happy to announce that the Illinois delegation has had a long session in which everyone, as typical with the spirit of the democracy of Illinois, was given an opportunity to present their candidate and the views and reasons who the delegate should support. And the roll call is the following: 112 delegates for the next president of the United States, Hubert Humphrey. Three votes for McCarthy, 3 votes for McGovern. And we will not be stampeded by the booing and shouting. Young men and young women and old men and young women, this is Chicago, this is America. Be enthusiastic for your candidate, but don't attempt to stop any other man or woman to speak out for this candidate. And unite behind a man that will carry out the policies of Kennedy, carry out because
Chicago's Mayor Daley may have been the military commander of this convention, but he missed the bus, and he certainly is not the kingmaker as he had hoped he would be. While Daley dallied and held back his big block of Illinois votes that he'd promised for last Sunday, Vice President Humphrey simply sweet-talked the rebellious Southern delegates back into line, and the Humphrey delegate vote passed the magic majority without a single vote from Illinois. So Daley will get all the blame for the repressive police state concentration camp atmosphere of this convention, and none, I repeat, none of the credit for picking the winner. Howard?
Bill, they may have to court him to get the presidency, so maybe he can still hope to be a presidential kingmaker. With the presidential situation virtually a foregone conclusion, talk down on the floor now is centering around the vice presidential nomination. Let's go down to Bob Clark on the floor for a report on possibilities for that second spot.
Well, Howard, I'm told that Mr. Humphrey is very close to making a final selection on his running mate, that the choice will probably be made from 3 names. I think we can rule out one of these and maybe even 2. The first 2 names Humphrey sources mention are Senators Muskie of Maine and Fred Harris of Oklahoma. They start off with Muskie, who appears to have a substantial edge over Harris, who is only 37 years old and a very junior member of the Senate. The third name is Sergeant Shriver, the brother-in-law of John, Bob, and Ted Kennedy. His attraction being that he would help keep the disenchanted Kennedy and peace wings of the party in line in November. The weakness of this argument is that the Kennedy forces here in Chicago are giving no support at all to Shriver, who did not endear himself to Bob Kennedy when he became Lyndon Johnson's ambassador to Paris earlier this year. Interesting, Howard, the top Kennedy people here are not promoting anyone for the vice presidency. One of them told me today, we couldn't care less who Humphrey picks. Humphrey himself has said privately in recent weeks that Ted Kennedy was the only Democrat who could give him any real help in winning the election, but even he's now convinced that there isn't the faintest chance Kennedy would accept the number 2 spot. Humphrey has cited McCarthy as the only other Democrat who could strengthen the ticket at all, but the Humphrey camp has grown very bitter at McCarthy tactics and antics in recent weeks, and this has destroyed any idea of a Humphrey-McCarthy ticket. Do either one of you have any contrary views to all of this?
Well, Bob, my information is that Maine Senator Muskie has a long, long lead over all the other vice presidential contenders. But his selection certainly isn't final yet. There'll be some rather wide-ranging consultations later between Humphrey and party leaders from all over the country. Tonight I hear only two names beside Muskie. One is Governor Richard J. Hughes of New Jersey. He guided the Credentials Committee. And the other is Mayor Joseph Alioto of San Francisco, who is to place the vice president in nomination. It's interesting that all three are Roman Catholics. Muskie is of Polish origin, Hughes of Irish descent, and Alioto is an American of Italian origin. Muskie is a leading member of the Senate Club. He doesn't have a single enemy in the Senate. I've checked him out with leading Southerners, and they say he's okay, and that's the same word I get from organized labor.
The convention's afternoon session featured the long-awaited fight over the Vietnam plank in the platform. We'll examine that fight and its outcome after this message. The most hotly contested fight that this convention has seen and probably will see came this afternoon when the Vietnam plank of the platform was taken up. The majority plank, supported by the administration, calls for an end to the war but does not include a policy of unilateral de-escalation. It does call for an end to the bombing of the North, but only when such an action would not endanger our troops in the field. And herein is the major difference between the two reports. The minority argued that peace can come only with an unconditional end to all bombing in the North. The convention heard a total of 28 speakers on these subjects, 12 for each side. But when the debate was ended, the minority report was voted down 1,567 and 3/4 votes to 1,041 and 1/4 votes. Clearly, this was a victory for the Humphrey supporters over McCarthy and McGovern, and a good indication of how the balloting for the nomination will go later this evening. Here's the way that debate on the minority plank went earlier today, beginning with Senator Edward Muskie of Maine, who's been mentioned as a possible vice presidential contender, speaking for the majority report.
Mr. Chairman and delegates to this convention, sometimes in the emotion of the debate on Vietnam, we overemphasize our differences and ignore our wide areas of agreement. I wish, Mr. Chairman, there had been an accommodation within the platform committee. I wish a spirit of compromise had moved to resolve the differences. Each of these planks commits us to an early negotiated settlement. Each supports the idea of calculated risks to move us toward that settlement. The choice is this: a negotiated settlement with or a negotiated settlement without safeguards to protect free elections. A negotiated settlement which forces a coalition government on the South Vietnamese, or one that supports their right to decide that question. A bombing halt with or a bombing halt without consideration of the air protection for our troops against military risks arising north of the demilitarized zone. The kind of protection, I remind you, that brought relief to our boys at Khe Sanh. Mr. Chairman, I urge the adoption of the majority plank.
We have now a chance here to reprieve ourselves. We have a chance at least to eliminate the sickness and the faintness that has come over us. We have failed once already. We have put the brand of racism upon this convention by failing to heed the minority reports already of those who would seek equality. Let us once and for all, let us prove to the young people of America that the difference between us and the Republicans is not rhetoric, as they say it is. Let us not give them an argument from this point on for leaving us as they will unless we pass a meaningful plank with respect to Vietnam. Thank you.
I would like to speak this afternoon in behalf of the serviceman in Vietnam, because I believe that many of the decisions that are being made here in this convention hall by we politicians have been dictated by the prospects of victory or defeat. Victory or defeat in November. And I say to you that the serviceman has been handicapped enough in the past. And for God's sakes, if you adopt the minority report, you are going to jeopardize the lives of the servicemen in Vietnam. So please, I beg of you, don't play God with their lives. Adopt the majority report.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, I rise in support of the minority plank. This is the moment of truth for the Democratic Party. And this is the moment of truth for our country. The struggle on the floor of this convention will determine. I believe that to give the people of the United States a plank on Vietnam, which is indistinguishable from what was offered to us by the Republicans in Miami, is sheer suicide for our party. It was the issue of Vietnam and his deeply held feelings that the killing had to stop that motivated Robert Kennedy to become a candidate for president. A bullet stilled that voice, but he is here today, and if he were alive today, he would be on that platform speaking for this minority plank. Thank you. I hope that this great party of ours is not trying to turn the clock back to 1938, to seek another Chamberlain, to go to another Munich, surrender to the people who last week managed the rape of Czechoslovakia. That word hasn't been mentioned today, Czechoslovakia, but it's on my mind, and it's on the minds of the American people. And there are 200,000 Soviet troops in that unhappy land today. There's a minority among us represented over in Grant Park, and let me say that the police department, Mayor Daley, must all be related to Job. They've shown that much patience. A minority of a minority, who would substitute anarchism for ambition. They'd like to substitute beards for brains, license for liberty, they want pot instead of patriotism. burns instead of solutions. They want slogans instead of social reforms, and they would substitute riots for reasons. Neither the minority nor the majority in this convention can write a plank for the Democratic Party tailored to the views of this minority of a minority. And if we try to do it, we invite disaster for the candidate, for the party, for the nation, and for the free world. 4 years ago, our party and the nominees of our party promised the people that American boys would not be sent to fight in a land war in Asia. The people made an overwhelming commitment for peace. They voted for our distinguished leader, President Lyndon B. Johnson, but they got the policies of Senator Goldwater. Almost, please don't applaud, give me a little time. Almost immediately, combat troops were sent to fight in a steadily widening Asian war. 25,000 American men have died. What harvest do we reap from their gallant sacrifice? An erosion of the moral and spiritual base of American leadership. A demeaning entanglement with a corrupt political clique in Saigon. Disillusionment, despair here at home, and a disastrous postponement of imperative programs to improve our social ills. The American people, in my opinion, and overwhelmingly in that regard, think that we made a mistake. And yet, ladies and gentlemen and fellow delegates, read the proposed platform. We are called upon not only to approve this disastrous policy, but even to applaud it. I wonder how many of the American people are applauding it. They don't want to applaud it, they want to change it. I rise today to speak for peace. We all want peace. We all want to end the war. We all abhor killing. But I say to you that as a great political party and as a great nation leader of the world, we must pursue this goal with responsibility, with intellect, with intelligence, just as we are pursuing now the negotiations in Paris in the hopes of finding a political solution, a negotiated solution. And I say to you that the majority plank spells out the way that the next President of the United States can responsibly end the war. If we permit our simple emotions to carry us away from our intellectual consideration of the position we are going to take, then we cannot end the war in a way that will achieve peace in Southeast Asia nor peace anywhere else on the globe. Let the majority report not delude us. It does not change one iota from what we have suggested in the past. We suggest we look to the future. Let us recognize there is a civil war in Vietnam between the Saigon government and many other indigenous forces, the Viet Cong, but many others. Let us recognize that fact. The minority report says they must negotiate with each other about their own country and let Hanoi go home and let the United States bring her 600,000 troops home. That's what we seek. And lastly, let me just complete. Let us not delude the American people that we can adopt this platform in its domestic sense, meet our responsibilities for vast expenditures of money to meet the problems of the United States of America, and continue a foreign adventure, a foreign engagement that is costing us $30 billion a year. This is the height of irresponsibility, and let us not leave this convention as the Republicans left Miami, promising all things to all people. Thank you very much.
The world is too small, the times too frightening for the playing of political games with not our own fate alone, but with the direction of hope in the globe. And this is why I submit the basic difference between the two platform planks is the options that are ours after November. The times will change before the ink on this platform is dry. We have to point a direction. We dare not freeze a situation. And the majority platform plank does that. The world is round. The United States is a part of it. There's no longer a place to hide. We have to make our peace with it and around it. And our role is that of rising to the responsibilities of our leadership in the world.
You have heard some bitter charges today about our minority plank. My fellow citizens, I must ask you to believe me on the basis of my services in the White House under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, that I could never support a plank that called for a sellout, for a camouflage surrender, or for a unilateral withdrawal. I could never support a plank that would endanger American troops or undermine the Paris talks. I could never support a plank that would impose a communist or even a coalition government on South Vietnam. I could never support a plank that would start this nation back to isolationism or encourage the Soviet outrage in Czechoslovakia. But I would support, and I am supporting, a plank that gives the American voters some hope for an end to this miserable war. Can anyone believe, after the president's withdrawal and the polls and the primaries and the protests, that we can still ask the American people to support this war? If you cannot give our young people and the amateurs and the idealists the candidate of their choice, at least give them this plank to preserve their enthusiasm for the Democratic Party. We are not outside the mainstream of the Democratic Party. We agree with the Senate Democratic Majority Leader. We agree with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman. We agree with Ted Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and the voters in every Democratic primary. Stop the war.
I have been advised that a rumor has been initiated that Vice President Humphrey does not support the majority plank on Vietnam. I am authorized by Vice President Humphrey to inform the delegates that he fully supports the Vietnam plank. And I am pleased and proud to join the Vice President in supporting the majority plank on Vietnam because I think it is the right road to peace. The plank is reasonable, moderate, and a balanced statement.
Now there's much been said about our brave soldiers in Vietnam and how brave they are and what great sacrifices they have made. 25,000 of them with their lives, 100,000 with serious wounds. But if you want to protect those soldiers, you stop a policy of escalation that is killing them. I take my stand with a General Ridgway, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a General Gavin, a General Shoup, in urging a de-escalation, the falling back to lines that we can defend that will stop the killing of these boys until we can work out a multilateral negotiation for the settlement of this war. We can't do it on a bilateral basis. And so I close with a plea on my lips that the Democratic Party at this convention support a minority report that opens the door to multilateral negotiations and returns to the ideal of substituting the rule of law for the jungle law of military force. And when we practice it, then let me say we've got to make clear to Russia for its shocking action in Czechoslovakia that we're going to hold them too to the substitution of the rule of law for the jungle law of military force.
I ask the question, can General Abrams supply an answer to me of this question? And I pose the question. Is there any possibility of your providing even an approximate estimate of the additional casualties we would take if we stopped the bombing of North Vietnam unilaterally and unconditionally? And the answer came back, and here I read it to you. These are not my words. These are the words of General Abrams. If the bombing in North Vietnam, now authorized, were to be suspended unilaterally, the enemy in 10 days to 2 weeks could develop a capability in the DMZ area in terms of scale, intensity, and duration of combat on the order of 5 times what he now has. I cannot agree. I cannot agree to place our forces at the risk which the enemy's capability would then pose. That, my friends, that, my friends, concludes our debate. And thank you very much.
The vote was over, but the fight was not. Members of the California delegation put on black crepe armbands to show their dissatisfaction, and the New York delegation produced "Stop the War" signs and then tried to outsing the convention band. This is so far the biggest demonstration on the floor. Everyone has been trying to interpret what this means, whether it means the party will suffer a grievous split or whether those defeated will now accept Humphrey's leadership or the leadership of the candidate who is nominated tonight. can see those two big empty sections there, New York and California, where no one is sitting. They're all demonstrating. This was planned long beforehand. They had two demonstrations prepared. Those who were confident, thought they might win, had prepared a victory demonstration. However, they got the alternate out, the defeat demonstration, and this is it. Despite this demonstration, in fact, the humor of the debate was extremely good. The points were well made, tightly argued, no ground given, but there was great courtesy on both sides. For this, there were two chairmen. Even as the vote on the minority Vietnam plank was being taken, ABC's Don North was interviewing Senator Eugene McCarthy. It was not a good day for the Minnesota senator who has set such a remarkable record since last fall. He decided to go into the presidential race, and no one thought he could get anywhere with it. He had originally gotten into the race last November to make sure that his views on Vietnam were heard. Now the writing was on the wall, not just for the defeat of a minority report, but also for McCarthy's defeat as a presidential candidate, and it was an extremely sad occasion, as you will observe in this interview. Don North interviewed the senator just about this time. Senator McCarthy, as you have heard, was involved in negotiations about Ted Kennedy possibly being drafted, and that has now been dropped. Here now is that recording of that interview with Senator McCarthy.
Majority platform now accepted. Will you support Hubert Humphrey if he campaigns on this Vietnam plank?
Well, I don't think I will if he campaigns on that. I expect that he will probably develop a somewhat individual policy which might be acceptable to me. I'll have to perhaps make a choice between him and Nixon, but I don't see myself as enthusiastically supporting a Democratic candidate who follows a policy which I have been campaigning against for 9 months.
The specter of Richard Nixon in the White House doesn't influence your decision on this?
Oh, it frightens me a little bit, but a Republican in the White House is never really quite as free in the White House as a Democrat is, and especially one like Richard Nixon, who's a kind of a construction of the party. I expect that the party position will be a stronger one there than will be the influence of the personality of Richard Nixon. All things taken together, if the issues are the same, I would much rather have Hubert Humphrey there than Richard Nixon, however.
The Johnson-Humphrey hawkish Vietnam platform plank does pose some genuine vote problems for Vice President Humphrey in November. But his real troubles will be with recalcitrant Democratic doves who may choose to bolt to a fourth party or go fishing on Election Day. There's really no decisive issue posed on Vietnam between Republicans and Democrats, or between the Democrats and the Wallicites. Humphrey's real trouble lies with the backers of Senator McCarthy, Senator McGovern, and those who rallied to the cause of Senator Robert F. Kennedy before he was assassinated. All the primary results suggest that the opposing coalition had far more backing among Democrats than did the Johnson-Humphrey forces, a sentiment that I saw prevail from coast to coast. Now, maybe the vice president can rally some of these dissident Democrats back to his standards by his choice of a vice president. Maybe they'll just come back anyway because of that old Democratic habit of fighting like the Dickens and then making peace. And then there's one thing above all else. Republican presidential nominee Richard Nixon is the greatest unifying force the Democrats have known in their long and stormy history. Howard?
Thank you, Bill. In 1 minute, the story of the demonstrations outside the convention hall. This was the day that the nomination day that the hippies, the yippies, and other demonstrators promised that Chicago would not quickly forget. Thousands of long-haired, sandaled youths marched into Grant Park across Michigan Avenue from the Conrad Hilton Hotel, and ABC's Jim Burns was in the crowd.
Late report, National Guardsmen have moved into the area around the Conrad Hilton Hotel. They have bayonets fixed as demonstrators are still determined to march to the amphitheater tonight. Police and Guardsmen are equally determined to stop them. And now by film and videotape is a look at what has gone on today in downtown Chicago. The crowd of about 10,000 anti-war protesters finally got a permit today to hold a rally in the bandshell area of Grand Park. Police performed the menial task of passing out handbills, telling the demonstrators that a permit for their rally had been granted, quote, in the interest of free speech and assembly, end quote. The handbills also said that no permit for a march to the amphitheater had been granted, and that demonstrators would get nowhere but to a jail cell if they tried to march. Some elderly spectators watched as a band of youth marched around the park with black flags of mourning. The first incident of violence occurred when demonstrators went after an unmarked police car. Sticks, rocks, and beer cans were thrown at the police. When one of the hippie marshals tried to wrestle a friend away from the police, he was hit with a squirt of disabling mace. Back near the bandshell, the American flag had been lowered to half-staff. And then someone tried to raise a Viet Cong flag. A well-dressed woman tried to stop the raising of the flag, and an argument broke out. Sensing that the youth would soon spill out into Michigan Avenue and head toward the convention, phalanx of police gathered and began to make good on their promise that they would make arrests.
No, but you can't take a minority. You can't take a minority.
Get out! Those are the people.
Can't somebody help me? Help me, please.
Put it up, man. Put it up.
Please help me.
Ma'am, don't hurt her. Don't hurt her.
Still the incident over the Viet Cong flag.
You're the man. You're trying to do.
Go on and get out of here. Get out of here.
Stop.
And now the police begin to move in. It was not a pretty sight. Police began to make scores of arrests. No accurate count will be available for some time. There were many injuries. Ambulance were called in to move out the victims to hospitals.
Bill, watch it.
2 hours later, the real trouble started at Michigan and Balboa, just on the edge of the park. ABC's Don Farmer is there.
Here come the cops. Police are now moving into the drive. Police moving into the drive. And they're pushing this crowd back now. And it's going to be a very difficult job. A big police van is now pulled into the intersection. And its role, I assume, is to carry away... Now, here come the police. Step up here. Let the wire down. The police are now pushing and shoving. Here they come. We're going to get it. We're going to get it.
We've got it. No, they're clear, and we're out of the way.
Watch the wire. Watch the wire. Now the police are clubbing this young man. Clubbing him. This is a real police charge. Now I've seen them club at least 3 young people. Now they're moving into the crowd and beating them with the nightsticks. And the beatings are going on. Here they come. Now there are glasses and bottles being thrown.
This incident Don Farmer is describing was filmed, videotaped rather, about an hour and a half ago.
Here come the police. There are a lot of young people on the ground now. This is real bedlam. This is the worst it's been so far here in Chicago. Police running across here. Rocky, there's another one hit the ground and he's screaming. They're really letting him have it now. Here they come. There goes the police clubbing right in front of us. The police are clubbing these young people. Our truck, they're dragging one across the intersection.
They're dragging them across the intersection. This is the most amazing thing that's in the Loop in Chicago in modern history. Firecracker went off there. They've just turned Michigan and Balboa into a war zone. They have cleared part of the intersection. They've got these young people off on the sidewalk now. I saw dozens of them being beaten. And the police really mean business here in front of the Hilton Hotel.
These scenes were filmed about an hour and a half earlier, and even they can't quite illustrate just exactly what happened out there tonight. For tonight, in front of the Hilton Hotel, thousands of Americans, both young and old, witnessed an explosion of raw, brutal, sadistic police force, which marks one of the darkest hours of any police department anywhere in this country. There were dozens of people arrested. Many of them, as you've seen, were dragged along the asphalt road by their feet. One policeman might drag them, while the other one another policeman would beat the fallen demonstrator, and they were then hurled into the paddy wagon. There's no estimate of how many people were arrested or how many people were hurt. There were perhaps 2,000 young people in the intersection of Grant and Balboa. They'd taken over that intersection, having marched there from Grant Park, where their proposed march to the amphitheater had stalled and been broken up. Over and over again, the police charged into the thickly packed demonstrators, many of them who couldn't go anywhere. They were trapped between formations of police. They'd try to run one way, and the police would charge from the other direction and catch them in the middle. Tonight, in front of the Hilton Hotel, thousands of Americans, both young and old, witnessed an explosion of raw, brutal, and sadistic police force, which in my view marks one of the darkest hours of any police department anywhere in this country. It was an incident without parallel in the memory of this correspondent, and I've witnessed police brutality in Selma, Birmingham, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and many other cities. It was a police force gone mad, a swearing, club-swinging horde of men who seemed to take an intense delight in smashing their clubs against the heads and the bodies of young men and women trapped by their charge. Gone were all restraints, except that final one, the firing of guns. Along with the radicals of the left, the hardcore demonstrators who were deliberately seeking a confrontation with the police. There were charming young girls in flowered dresses and campaign straw hats. There were young men in college clothes mingling with those objects of the most intense police hatred, the hippies and the yippies and others of their kind. Now, it's true these young people had occupied the intersection of Balboa and Michigan. It's true they did block all traffic. It's true they refused over and over again to obey police orders to move on. But now, today, here in America, have we no other way to handle our young who would protest than this? Could there not have been a more reasoned, more humane way of forcing these people to give up their flimsy barricades? Just before the police charged tonight, someone in an upper window of the Blackstone Hotel threw dozens of paper flowers from a window. They floated to the street, and some of the young people were picking them up and laughing when the charge came. This is Jim Burns.
We'll take a look at the mixture of politics and show business here in Chicago right after this message. Business in politics, we'll have to delay that after those last pictures. I would like now to turn to our two guest commentators, William Buckley and Gore Vidal, and to ask them what observations they've made about the security that we have seen all week at this convention and the events tonight on the streets beyond this convention hall. Who is first? Mr. Vidal first.
I think there's very little that we can say after those pictures that would be in any way adequate. It's like living under a Soviet regime here. The guards, the soldiers, the agents provocateur on the parts of the police. You've seen the roughing up. The background of it is that they came here for a rally on the 25th of August at Convention Soldier Field, a coalition for an open convention. They were denied the use of the field. It was a friendly, a nonviolent demonstration. As a rule, the press is on the side of the police, but this time the police have seriously injured some 21 newsmen, and the press has, of course, reacted. And on top of that, television is duly upset with Mayor Daley for other reasons. I'd just like to point out that picking up a newspaper at random on my way here, the Chicago Daily News, there's a columnist called Mike Royko, who says Thomas E. Farran, the U.S. attorney, says Chicago police have shown, quote, wonderful discipline in their handling of the Lincoln Park demonstrators. Farran is either stupid or a liar, or maybe he's been wandering around in the wrong park. Chicago's police, for his information, have been beating innocent people with, to coin a phrase, reckless abandon. And he goes on to say that the biggest threat to law and order in the last week has been the Chicago Police Department. On an inside page here, we have one of the grisliest pictures I've seen in some time. It shows a group of police standing and laughing as they have thrown into the water a young man on a bicycle. And the caption is, the witnesses said the police then just stood back and laughed. The youth reportedly had just been riding through the park. He had not even been part of the Yippee gathering.
I wonder if we can let Mr. Buckley comment now. Short while.
The distinctions to be made, Mr. Smith, are these. Number one, do we have enough evidence to indict a large number of individual Chicago policemen? It would seem from what Mr. Burns showed us that we do. However, the effort here, not only on your program tonight, but during the past 2 or 3 days in Chicago, has been to institutionalize this complaint so as to march forward and say that, in effect, we have got a police state going here. We've got a sort of a fascist situation. One young man approached me last night and said, are you aware that Mayor Daley is a fascist? To which my reply was no. And if that is the case, why didn't John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, whose favorite mayor he was, indict him as such and teach us that we should all despise him as a fascist? The point is that policemen violate their obligations just the way politicians do. If we could all work up an equal sweat, and if you all would be obliging enough to have your cameras handy, every time a politician commits demagogy or passes along a graft for bribes, or every time a businessman cheats on his taxes, or every time a labor union beats up people who refuse to join his unions, then maybe we could work up some kind of impartiality and resentment. As of this moment, I say, go after those cops who are guilty of unnecessary brutality. Develop your doctrine of security sufficiently so that when you don't have as many cops as you should have had, for instance, in Dallas in November of 1963, you don't go and criticize the FBI for not having been there, for not having taken sufficient security measures. But don't do what's happening here in Chicago tonight, which is to infer from individual and despicable acts of violence a case for implicit totalitarianism in the American system.
Mr. Vidal.
I should say that the issue was, of course, go after the bad cops. There are good cops as well as bad. But there is a more important issue here, a constitutional issue, and this is going to be repeated across the country. We have the right, according to our Constitution, of freedom of assembly. And if you want to hold a meeting for a peaceful purpose to demonstrate, you have that right. That right was abrogated by Mayor Daley, by his administration, by the Cook County Sheriff Joseph Woods. These people came here with no desire other that anybody has ever been able to prove than to hold peaceful demonstrations.
I can prove it.
How can you prove it?
Very easily, by citing the recorded words of Mr. Hayden of the SDS, of Mr. Rennie Davis of the Coordinating Committee, whose object has been to, quote, break down the false and deceptive institutions of bourgeois democracy are sufficient to set in a revolutionary order. Anybody who believes that these characters are interested in the democratic process is deluding himself. I was 14 windows above that gang last night. These sweet little girls with their sun-decked dresses that we heard described a moment ago, and the chant between 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock in this morning from 4,000 or 5,000 voices was sheer, utter obscenities directed at the President of the United States, at the mayor of this city, plus also the intermittent refrain, quotes, ho, 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 Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is sure to win. This is their way of accosting American society concerning their brothers, their sisters, their uncles, their fathers who are being shot at by an enemy to which, wrongly or rightly, nevertheless, we are fighting. I say it is remarkable that there was as much restraint shown as was shown, for instance, last night by cops who were out there for 17 hours without inflicting a single wound on a single person, even though that kind of disgusting stuff was being thrown at them and at all of American society.
Our reporter, Jim Burns, said there ought to be a different way to handle situations like that.
I wish he would invent it. Why don't you ask him next time, maybe tomorrow, to tell us how to handle it, because I'm sure the Republican Party and the Democratic Party would form a joint platform which would suggest how to do it. Every time we develop an instrument like mace, for instance, the purpose of which is actually to stop a situation when the law is on the side of stopping it without rendering permanent injury, that everybody goes hog mad at its use. What are we, in fact, supposed to use when they break law and order as handed down by judges? The right to assembly is not absolute. The Supreme Court has ruled several occasions.
Let's let Mr. Vidal have a chance.
The right of assembly is in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. Nothing on earth is absolute.
Right.
We live in a relativist world.
Right.
However, it is the law, it is the Constitution, and let us have no more sly comments in your capacity as the enemy of the people. By the way, you got an invitation this afternoon I haven't passed on to you from Norman Mailer, our mutual friend who was out there, as was I on Monday night. And he said, you tell Buckley to come out here. He might be very interested to see how his beloved police are behaving.
How was
that? They are, you said you were on the 15th floor. I don't believe you were there. And furthermore, when you start quoting Tom Hayden and the other leaders of the New Left who were involved in this, I suggest you get the quotes right. They are talking about revolution. They are not talking about bloody civil war as you would indicate.
Yeah.
Well, until you get the exact quotes, your well-known
all you do is violate the law,
your distortion.
And leave it to somebody else.
It is no violation of the law to freely demonstrate, as you well know.
Now, wait a minute. The law is not something that you make up.
No, it's something in the Constitution that you cannot interpret. They came here for free assembly. They came here to demonstrate against the Vietnam War, which you happen to love. I'm sorry for that. They have not been allowed to hold a meeting in Soldier Field, which they should have had, could have had, would have had a peaceful demonstration. Instead, the police, fired by Mayor Daley and by a lot of jingoes around here, have been roughing up everybody from the press to the delegates to the kids out there, and you are to sit here by and talk about law and order.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about what the Supreme Court says, including Oliver Wendell Holmes, whom presumably you also despise. But the first relevant decision 110 years ago says that the demands of rights of assembly are not absolute in the sense that, for instance, there is no obligation on the part of the city of Chicago to allow all these people to come into this amphitheater and demonstrate. An extension of that piece of common sense shows the wisdom and the correctness of the federal court and the Supreme Court in the past to say that you cannot arrange a demonstration in such a way as to interfere with other people's freedoms. Mr. Burns admitted a moment ago that these people were interrupting the freedoms of people to cross the street, for instance.
Freedom of the people to cross the street.
They were given a license to demonstrate at a particular
moment. However, when they were in the parks on Monday night when I observed them, I watched the police come in like this from all directions, standing. They were sitting there singing folk songs. There were none of the obscenities which your ear alone seems to have picked up. They were absolutely well-behaved. And suddenly the police began. You would see one little stirring up in one corner, then you would suddenly see a bunch of them coming in with their nightclubs, and, may I say, without their badges, which is illegal.
Mr. Vidal, wasn't it a provocative act to try to raise the Viet Cong flag in the park in the film we just saw? Wouldn't that invite... raising a Nazi flag in World War II would have had similar consequences.
You must realize what some of the political issues are here, that many... People in the United States happen to believe that the United States policy is wrong in Vietnam, and the Viet Cong are correct in wanting to organize their country in their own way politically. This happens to be pretty much the opinion of Western Europe and many other parts of the world. If it is a novelty in Chicago, that is too bad. But I assume that the point of the American democracy is you can express any point of view you want. Shut up a minute.
No, I won't. Some people were pro-Nazi, and the answer is that they were well treated by people who ostracized them, and I'm for ostracizing people who egg on other people to shoot American Marines and American soldiers. I know you don't care.
As far as I'm concerned, the only pro-crypto Nazi I can think of is yourself. Failing that, I would only say that we can't have...
Now listen, you
the right of
stop
assembly
calling me a crypto-Nazi.
Let's stop
or I'll
calling
slap
names
you in
and
your
let's get-
goddamn face, and you'll stay plastered.
Gentlemen, let's...
Bill.
Let the author of Myra
extraordinary.
Breckenridge go back to his pornography and stop making any allusions of Nazism to
beg
somebody
you
who was
to-
in the infantry in the last war.
You were
and
not in the
fought
infantry,
Nazis.
as a matter of
I
fact.
was
You
the
didn't
second.
fight in
I would
the
like
infantry.
to
You were
ask
not.
Mr.
Now you're
Vidal.
distorting your own military record.
Mr. Vidal,
What happened at Sharon?
Wasn't it a provocative act to pull down an American flag and put up a Viet Cong flag, even if you disagree with what the United States is doing?
It is not a provocative act. You have every right in this country to take any position you want to take because we are guaranteed freedom of speech. We've just listened to a rather grotesque example of it.
Now, let's not talk at the same time. Mr. Buckley.
Certain acts that are lawful are nevertheless provocative. I'll give you an example. George Lincoln Rockwell wanted to go to Manhattan and stage a hate Jew rally, see? Now, Mayor Wagner said, no, you can't. Yeah. Now, some people, the American Civil Liberties Union, said, well, George Lincoln Rockwell has got a right to go there under the Constitution. All right, theoretically he has a right, but there is no question that it would have been provocative. I, for one, have to confess that I would have been discreetly on the side of people who threw tomatoes and maybe something even a little tougher at George Lincoln Rockwell. Now, here's an example of a right, but nevertheless, as you point out, a provocation. One doesn't go to Manhattan and come out in favor of Buchenwald. I think that the whole point of the American system is, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand, that the reason we succeed as a society is because we exclude certain things. We exclude genocide. We exclude class hatred. We ought to exclude it. And whether it's fighting a Maddox here or fighting people who come out in favor of Ho Chi Minh in Lincoln Park, the whole purpose of American society is that we're in favor of people who want to be free, not in favor of people who want to despise anybody else or commit America to genocidal policy.
Mr. Vidal, you...
What more to say on the subject?
Well,
I think we've seen
is there not
the passions of Mr. Buckley on this issue, the infantry warrior, which he never saw a shot fired in anger. I would point out that I come back, you keep asking me, Howard, about this provocative act. There are many acts which provoke. But if you're going to have freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, you must be able to say it. That is the whole point of this country. No. And once this is abrogated, then I think we might just as well stop these wars of freedom. What are we doing fighting in Vietnam if you cannot freely express yourself in the streets of Chicago?
I think we've run out of time, and I thank you very much for the discussion. There was a little more heat and a little less light than usual, but it was still very worth hearing. Tomorrow night, you'll have a chance to consider Humphrey's vice presidential choice. We'll have more on Chicago Day 3, the nomination, after this message. Has often been called the greatest show on earth, and where there's a show, there are always stars. Correspondent Sam Donaldson reports on the celestial bodies who have come to Chicago.
Howard, the back lots of Hollywood must be empty this week. Broadway must be dark. All the stars seem to be here in Chicago. They've come not so much to entertain the Democrats as to evangelize them, fighting for causes and candidates alongside politicians some people have heard of, delegates no one has heard of, are the beautiful people of stardom that everyone knows from stage, screen, and jukebox.
Drums keep pounding a rhythm to the brain. La-di-da-di-dee, la-di-da-di-da. Grandmas sit in chairs and reminisce. Boys keep chasing girls to get a kiss.
You don't really have to be a beautiful person to be a star. Hubert Humphrey has won the backing of jukebox idols Sonny and Cher, who may be unbeautiful, but who would undoubtedly occupy the White House if only the younger generation elected president.
I came here for two reasons. One is to support Vice President Humphrey. I should say three reasons. Secondly, to rally youth behind Vice President Humphrey. Good.
Sonny wants young people on a government commission charged with finding ways to bridge the generation gap. And he prowls the convention amphitheater, buttonholing for his scheme.
I performed to thousands of kids. The last performance I did was at a Newport Jazz Festival in California. There were 50,000 kids there. Frankly, I almost cried because they were like vegetables. All they cared about was dropping flowers from a helicopter, smoking pot, having sex, and nothing else. They don't go beyond that. Nothing else is important anymore. If I could stress on you how important sex is to kids, they just do it. It doesn't mean anything. It means nothing to them anymore. All these things, it's just complete apathy.
Why do the stars work so hard? And is it really fair of them to capitalize on their fame this way? New York Convention delegate and McCarthy man, Theodore Bickel.
I'm using it, I admit it. It's a shill, it's a come-on. People perhaps come in the expectation to hear me sing or recite, but they go away having heard me speak and perhaps having taken on a couple of my ideas, and that's all that matters. It doesn't, everybody uses what he has. I don't care why they come. I do care passionately with what thoughts in their mind they leave.
In 1960, Shirley MacLaine belonged to the Hollywood Rat Pack and was for John Kennedy. But the pack broke up. Leader Frank Sinatra is now for Humphrey. Shirley MacLaine is for George McGovern. She talked politics with Marlene Sanders.
Are you satisfied that this is enough participation? Would you ever consider actually running for office as, say, Shirley Temple Black? Yes.
I wouldn't do it the way she did it, I'll tell you that. She should have run on what I believe. She might have been elected, but Shirley Temple to run as a hawk, that's ridiculous. I don't think that I would be happy behind a desk.
How much of an influence would you say the careers of Ronald Reagan and George Murphy have had on the Hollywood community?
If the Miami convention and the theatrics of it is any example, I would say it's been detrimental because it wasn't a very good show.
I don't care whether you work for Nixon or you work for McCarthy. I mean, so long as you work, and that whole area of apathy and indifference in the beginning of participating politics, which was so exciting with McCarthy, and which, of course, everybody is trying desperately to copy, and no one's been able to cut that yet. I mean, I've seen, the debacle in Miami, and it was just sickening to watch the machine in action and everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, our leader.
Save the USA, the McCarthy way. America's the greatest land of all.
It's very difficult to be funny. There's very little to be funny about. I didn't think the Republican convention was terribly funny. I don't think the world situation today is funny. I don't think Marshal Key is funny. I don't think General Thieu is funny. I wish they'd bring back Madame Nou. She was funny. If she was a real person, someone you could identify with. You get the humor, you get the trend of my thought now, how I sneak them in? But Nixon isn't funny. Agnew is funny.
What does it all mean beyond the free show these stars provide the conventioneers? Does it mean votes for the candidates? If Hubert Humphrey is nominated tonight, will it be because Sonny and Cher sang their way into the roll call? And how can McCarthy lose with a man on his side who can beat Minnesota Fats in a movie pool game? Well, we don't have any overall answers, but there is one piece of evidence that seems to disprove the idea that stars can sway votes. Shirley MacLaine, who is for McGovern, can't even persuade her own family. Her brother, Warren Beatty, is for Humphrey.
We will go back to the serious business of the convention, nominating a president, after this message. Tonight is what the convention is really about. The reason that over 3,000 delegates have come from 50 states and the territories, why 7,000 newsmen are here and many thousands of security people. This is the night that the 35th Democratic Convention will nominate the presidential candidate. Here are highlights of those lengthy and tedious speeches that place a candidate's name in nomination. This is, the first one will be Governor Hughes, Harold Hughes of Iowa, nominating Senator Eugene McCarthy as candidate for presidency of the United States.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, fellow delegates, and fellow Americans, I've come to this platform tonight to place in nomination for the office of President of the United States the name of Senator Eugene J. McCarthy of Minnesota. I do not speak for myself alone, but for millions of Americans who believe this man has brought new hope and new options to America. We're in the midst of what can only be called a revolution in our domestic affairs and in our foreign policy as well. And as the late President Kennedy once said, those who would make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. In this time of unprecedented crisis, the nomination for the presidency is more than the selection of an able and a qualified individual for the office. We must have bold leadership willing to undertake the basic changes in our political system that are so necessary to its survival. We must seek a leader who can arrest the polarization in our society, the alienation of the blacks from the whites, the haves from the have-nots, and the old from the young. We must choose a man with the wisdom and the courage to change the direction of our foreign policy before it commits us for an eternity to a maze of foreign involvements without clear purpose or moral justification. But most of all, the man we nominate must embody the aspirations of all those who seek to lift mankind to its highest potential. He must have that rare, intangible quality that can lift up our hearts and cleanse the soul of this troubled country. Gene McCarthy is such a man.
Next, the mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Joseph L. Alioto, a new star in the Democratic Party, puts into nomination the name of the front runner, the Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey.
Everything this man has done has combined a recognition that we have a precious heritage out of which we have crystallized a good deal of wisdom, and we revere it. But this man is no wanderer in history. He respects it, and he gets inspired by history, but he has always exhibited the kind of creative imagination that can take us from one political set of facts to a new set of facts and yet preserve all of those values that have been dear to us. It isn't enough, I say, that you mouth to the youngsters, that you mouth this talk about new options and the inflexible status quo, for here is the man who has done more than any other discernible man in the last 20 years to bring America not only to the recognition of what is old and good, but what is new and good as well, and he's going to continue to do that. As Hubert Humphrey now moves from a member of a team, a good, loyal member of a great team, as he moves from a member to the captain of that team, you will see that he will shape the events of the present for the very future that all of us demand, young, old, and in between again. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to this convention the name of Hubert Horatio Humphrey as nominee for the President of the United States. Thank you very much.
Well, Bill Lawrence, the presidential spot is just about filled, and you predicted who it would be some time ago, but there's still the mystery over who's going to be the number 2 on the Humphrey ticket. So we come to you now for another fearless prediction as we put you on the spot.
Well, I've only got one neck to stick out for my network, so here I go out on that long, shaky limb. For Vice President, Senator Muskie of Maine. And if that one comes true, I'm quitting as ABC's political editor to open an astrology parlor on Pennsylvania Avenue very near to the White House.
Every 4 years, a lot of people beat a path to your door. I would like to make a prediction, too, about today's most prominent figure at the convention. For the past few months, Democrats who like fire in their candidates have expressed disappointment about the performance of Hubert Humphrey, the blandness of his speeches, often waffling statements, his failure to electrify audiences. Well, the truth is that Mr. Humphrey is about the least bland member of the Democratic Party. Lyndon Johnson once called him the greatest coordinator of vocal cord and brain extant. The Wall Street Journal said of him, he has more solutions than there are issues. He has taken more firm stands, and what is more, got them enacted into law than all of his liberal opponents of this year together, Senators McCarthy, McGovern, and the late Senator Robert Kennedy. Blandness and waffling, the unelectrifying politics of happiness, are standard operating behaviors for a front runner before a convention anxious to keep his party united behind him. And this convention has shown that that is a chancy job indeed. So I predict that the Hubert Humphrey who leaves this convention tomorrow will be a vastly different political animal from the man who has been tiptoeing across a bridge of eggshells over canyons filled with crocodiles for months. As we have throughout this convention, we will go to the floor live, and when the key events occur, there's no more important job before this convention than to vote for a presidential candidate. The roll call vote has not yet been taken. We will return live to the floor for that vote whenever it comes. This is Howard K. Smith in Chicago.
From Chicago, ABC News has presented Race to the White House. ABC News special coverage of the 1968 Democratic National